Health Matters, brought to you by Integrated Rehabilitation Group.
Already good stuff. I feel that we're saving lives today, Shannon.
Absolutely.
One listener at a time. Of course, this is Integrated Rehabilitation Group Health Matters. If you have any questions, you can go to our Facebook page at Integrated Rehabilitation Group /Facebook, and you can submit a question or comment. Joining us is our good friend. He's the health officer from the Snohomish County Health District. Dr. Gary Goldbaum is with us. Doc, thanks a lot for coming back.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
We're going to talk about the Japanese disaster, earthquake, and radiation concerns. So what is our risk in Washington State from the current nuclear power energy emergency in Japan?
Great question. First, our hearts really go out to all of the Japanese after the tsunami, and now they're having to deal with nuclear reactors that seem to be out of control. The risks here, great question. So it's going to depend on a lot of things. Right now, there appears to be very low risk, but of course we don't know how events are going to play out. So there's a lot going on out there. There's monitoring going on across the state, actually across the country, Hawaii, Alaska, all up and down the West Coast, and actually across the United States. So we're getting reports about the amount of radiation that can be detected. Here in Washington State, as of this morning, the counts appear to be at the background level. All that means is that there's always radiation in the background. We're always experiencing some of it, radon gas, cosmic radiation, and so on. And we're not seeing any increases so far. I do understand that there have been some of the radioisotopes that can be released from nuclear reactors that have been detected here in the United States. But again, the levels appear to be very low. So at this time, we don't believe that there is any health hazard to the population. But that said, I think it's really important for all of us to appreciate radiation can be harmful, and many of us are really concerned.
So, I've watched a little bit of the news, and CNN's talking about it all the time, and really it depends on the prevailing winds, doesn't it? I mean, is it the jet stream that is going to push it our way, how it's picked up in the atmosphere?
So it's going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on how much radiation is actually released, right, how high it goes into the atmosphere, whether it's caught by those jet stream winds, and that brings it across the Pacific Ocean. And then it's going to depend on what happens. Is there precipitation that's going to bring the stuff down onto the ground? And how quickly is it going to be dispersed on the ground? And then finally, it's going to depend on how we're exposed to it. So, for example, does it get onto the food supply, onto the grasses consumed by cows, which are producing milk that is consumed then? Or is it simply going to fall onto rooftops, and we're not really going to be particularly exposed?
Does it bind to the dust particles? Is that kind of how it binds in the atmosphere and gets dropped out of the atmosphere?
Yeah, these are particles that are being carried through the atmosphere.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Right. So what should we be concerned about on the Pacific Coast here? And I've heard people talk about vacations to Hawaii, for example, that are coming up, and they're concerned about going to Hawaii because it's in that pathway.
Yeah. How much radiation does there have to be to cause a health problem?
Yeah. Good question.
That's a really good question, and of course that also depends on a lot of factors. So, for example, it's the kind of radiation that you're exposed to. There are different kinds of radiation. It depends on where in your body you're exposed. So if you are exposed to the types of radiation like iodine, which accumulates in the thyroid gland, an important gland, it's in our neck, well, that's going to have a different effect than other types of radiation that may be accumulated in the bones and other places. So no simple answer to the question of how much radiation. Again, at this time, the amount of radiation in this country is at background levels, as near as we can tell. There's this monitoring going on, and I think it's real important for us to keep on paying attention. What's going on out there? Is there an increase in the background radiation that makes us a little more concerned?
Do we know if that includes Hawaii, like Shannon was saying?
To my knowledge, there hasn't been any increase in Hawaii compared to the background radiation, but the really important issue right now is that whatever we're seeing at this time is not at any levels that should cause us any concerns.
Okay.
On the other hand, I think it's right for all of us to stay attuned to what's going on.
Well, what are the symptoms and signs of radiation sickness, generally speaking?
Well, radiation sickness, actually, you can see it in the medical community. People who are treated for cancers, for example, they get radiation therapy and the same kinds of side effects. Nausea, vomiting, loss of hair. Eventually, it can actually... high exposures can result in dehydration, bleeding problems, and ultimately even death.
Okay. So is there a difference between radiation exposure and radioactive contamination?
Yeah. When we think about radiation, there's radiation that's always going through the air. So we think of cosmic radiation, for example. X-rays, that's radiation that's penetrating. It just appears from one place and zips right through solid things. On the other hand, contamination. So if you've got the dust particles that are radioactive, so you've got the particle, it wants to emit this radiation. That's the contamination if that particle gets on or in you. So the difference here, contamination means you've got something that's radioactive, it's emitting this radiation, it gets on or in you. The radiation itself is what's coming out of that contamination.
Okay, so an example would be like the milk and the lettuce or spinach they were talking in Japan is contaminated. That's the contamination. Okay,
right.
Got it. Well, is there any long-term consequences? Obviously, we know there are, but can you talk about some long-term consequences of exposure or contamination?
Well, sure. All radiation contamination or exposure is cumulative. And the real challenge for us is that if you're exposed to a little bit, we know that it poses some threat. If you're exposed to more, it's a much greater threat. And it's pretty much a dose kind of relationship. And it's cumulative over time. You should be exposed to as little radiation over time as possible. On the other hand, what we understand is that we're always being exposed to radiation in the background. So it's not like what's happening right now is extraordinary.
You know, I sense just watch the news and listening, there's a lot of concern out there. And, you know, you hear how places have sold out iodine tablets and people are buying suits and people are buying, what are the Geiger counters or the measuring tools for it. Why don't you address that concern?
Well, I think it's very real. All of us have, I think, a healthy fear about being exposed to radiation. On the other hand, again, right now, the amount of radiation that we're being exposed to is at background levels. It's the same thing that we've been exposed to for the past weeks, months, years. And I wouldn't be recommending to anybody that they need to take extraordinary precautions at this time. Everyone would say, well, yeah, but how do you know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day? And again, based on what we're understanding about what's happening in Japan, given the fact that it's quite far away, thousands of miles away, given the types of emissions that we know are going to come from that nuclear reactor, the best projections of the scientists are that we are likely to be exposed to very low, likely levels that are not going to be harmful to health. That said, again, we're monitoring. There's federal and state monitoring of of the amount of radiation here, and I think it's real important for people to just pay attention. But I think it's really important also for us to be realistic about this. There are side effects to the medications that people can take for prevention. For example, potassium iodide. People can have severe allergic reactions, and it can cause more minor kinds of effects, nausea and so on. It's not benign, especially if children, infants, take potassium iodide. It can have long-term effects on the development because it affects their thyroid gland. So we wouldn't recommend that people start taking any of these medicines until such time as we believe that there really is a health effect.
That's a good point. Who is, just out of curiosity, who is in charge of protecting the general public and notifying the general public regarding radiation contamination or whatever may occur?
Well, you've got the whole public health community mobilized to assure that the health of the public's looked after. And so you've got the federal government doing the monitoring internationally, doing the modeling about what's happening with the weather patterns and all that kind of stuff. You've got the state Department of Health, which is paying close attention to what's actually happening here in the state, making sure that all of us at the local level know what's going on so that we can provide the best information to the citizens here, so that we can be on top of it and ready to give the message out about what we all need to do.
Well, in closing, since we have Dr. Goldbaum here, I read and heard we have a case, unfortunately, of swine flu, a fatality, I believe. Is that true?
There was a case. A young man died in Snohomish County, but he was a Camino Island resident. It's a reminder, this is a young man and with a family. It's a reminder that flu is not benign, that it is still with us. And that
still as strong as last year?
Well, it's the same basic strain of flu, and it's still circulating, and it has a predilection for the young. So that's a real concern for us.
So I received a shot last year during the height of it, and am I still protected, or do I have to have another shot?
If you just got the H1N1 shot, you should get the current season one because it also protects against other strains of flu. H1N1 isn't the only thing that's out there circulating, so you'll be even better protected against all of the flu this year.
So what you're saying, the shot this year is a combined H1N1 and general influenza?
Others.
Okay, now all others.
You bet, you bet. And of course, this is just a great reminder. What's the best way to protect all of us? Cover your cough.
Right.
Stay home if you're sick. Wash your hands and get your flu shot. And just by the way, if you want to do something else to protect the community, you can certainly check on the Red Cross website, and there are ways that you can volunteer with them. Also, you can check with the Snohomish Health District about the Medical Reserve Corps. We're always looking for folks who can help us should there be an emergency here in Snohomish County where we're going to need folks who can help with the medical part of things.
Huh.
Always great information.
Yeah, it's always good, and it's always good to stay home if you're sick, too. Because,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Maury,
Dr. Gary Goldbaum, thank you so much for joining us. All right, Shannon, good show. So let's kind of change things up a little bit. What did you learn today?
Maury, I learned that if your heart flutters or you have palpitations, you need to get it checked. Either go to your family physician or a cardiologist because you want to rule out any problems. Secondly, I learned that we're fairly safe and we have a lot of good people looking out for our welfare as far as radiation goes.
Right.
And that scare. And then I learned also that I'm going to review my disaster kit. Although I already gone down and checked it, I'm going to check it again just because I know some other things I need to put in.
It's a lot of water.
A lot of water. Which, I talked to Chuck off the air, and water, depending on the type of water, is good. I think he said for 2 to 7 years.
Oh,
so you have to check it. If you have water that's more than 2 years old, you might want to replace it.
We want to thank our guest, Dr. Sanjeev Garwal, cardiologist for Western Washington Medical Group, Dr. Gary Goldbaum, health officer from the Snohomish Health District, and then Chuck Morrison, he's from the Snohomish County Red Cross, for joining us. If you want more information on all our guests, go to irgpt.com and click on the Health Media tab. Join us for our next edition of Health Matters. That'll be next Monday at 6. Thanks for listening. For Tom Lafferty, for Karen Mork, I'm Maury Eskenazi.
I'm Shannon O'Kelley. Stay fit and stay healthy.